It being 10 o'clock, pursuant to order made on Thursday, September 15, 2022, the House will now proceed to statements by members concerning the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Orders of the day, ordre du jour. Oh, no. Oh, sorry. The honourable member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we rose yesterday to observe a minute's silence marking the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, it struck me that it was such an honor and a privilege to be in this place on such a historic moment. And I hope that's something that we all realize here in the House. I hadn't intended to speak, but my thoughts made their way to my family and the connection that I have with them now, especially my grandson James. And the connection being in this place forges for each of us with descendants who will only know us by the memories we leave. These memories of our Queen, whose entire reign I've witnessed, the memories she's left for us, give us an opportunity to reflect on what we too will leave, not only for our families, but for our country, given the contribution to our national history that each of us has been privileged to offer by virtue of being here. To know that what we have an opportunity to offer in this moment will be captured as long as there is a Canada. And this can be as enduring to our families as that part of unforgettable history our Queen has given to all of us. My reflections will begin with the fact that our new King, Charles III, is of my time. I'll reflect more on this in a few moments. King Charles, in fact, is 2 years younger than me. Just as he grew up in the realm of the royal family, I grew up in the glow and the influence that the royal family had on our post-war Canada. Both my grandfathers served for King and Country in World War I. Both my parents did likewise in World War II. I was around when King George VI was king and on the throne, when Sir Winston Churchill and Mackenzie King were prime ministers. I remember the Queen's coronation, and I remember the Canadians' love and affection for her. How her love of horses, of steam locomotives, not to mention the grease under her fingernails as a mechanic and a truck driver during the war. This established her place in our hearts long before her coronation. And learning of her love for Canada only made the bond stronger for my family. I remember my mom getting teary-eyed so many years after the fact whenever she spoke about the abdication of King Edward VIII. And I remember going to the movies where at the end of the film the Union Jack would come on the screen and we would all stand for the Queen. A couple of moments I'd like to share. One of them starts in 1939, even before my time, when King George and the Queen Mother visited Vancouver to officially open the Lionsgate Bridge and the Hotel Vancouver. 60 years later, the hotel celebrated an anniversary by offering amnesty to anyone who had lifted something from the hotel over the years. There was a prize for the most unique item. Well, imagine the shock and embarrassment to see in the Vancouver Province newspaper that the winner was a relative, my Uncle George Dawes, who presented the hotel with a beautiful little sherry glass from which the Queen Mum had sipped. Now, Uncle George hastened to inform all that it was another uncle, his brother Danny, who served the Queen Mum at the hotel during the royal visit, and that it was Danny who pinched the sherry glass. Only now do I reveal the family connection. For the other moment, we need to fast forward to the American bicentennial in 1976. At that time, I was working at CFOB, a radio station in Fort Frances, Ontario, right across the river from International Falls, Minnesota. I had the privilege of interviewing photographer John DeVisser, who had contributed photos from our region to Canada's bicentennial gift to the United States, Entre Nous, the wonderful collection of photos along our world's longest undefended border. John's photos, by the way, grace the National Gallery of Canada and many other spots and places across our country. Well, during our broadcast, John mentioned that he had been commissioned by the royal family to photograph Prince Charles' 1975 visit to the Canadian North. This was the one where our future king dove underneath the Arctic ice for half an hour, to the great worry and wringing of hands everywhere from Ottawa to London. He, by the way, also sampled raw seal liver, which cemented his reputation, at least with me, as either a fearless adventurer or at the very least a very good sport. Well, there was a big dinner thrown for the Prince of Wales. The whole community was there. They dined on all of the exquisite delicacies that the people in the north are fortunate to enjoy. Well, as the story goes, and as John DeVisser told it, because he was there taking pictures, after the main course, a young Inuit lad was clearing away Charles' dishes. The boy leans across the table and whispers, "Lick your fork, Duke, there's pie." Now, if you're a fan of Canadian literature, you'll see this story recounted in Mordecai Rickler's novel, Solomon Gursky Was Here. I'd like to end with a reflection about the young fellow who grew up with me and who mourns his mum as I did mine, but who now takes on the enormous mantle of responsibility and history as King Charles III. Now, here's someone who's been educated, mentored, and shaped his whole life to fulfill a unique constitutional role as a monarch. He represents the kind of continuity of experience and values and perspectives that republics, at least the democratic ones, lack. Well, there's something valuable in that, and it provides our nation with a foundation that serves us well. Charles III carries with him the values that he and I grew up with, shaped, though, by the monumental changes and challenges human affairs have presented us over our past 70-plus years. He, like most of the generation he and I come from, have had to develop a certain resilience of perspective and adaptation to change. He will do well. And his son, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, will in time benefit from the handoff he receives from his dad. And although the education and mentoring William receives, added to the rich history and continuity of the monarchy, will be uniquely placed to offer to our nation and the whole world, the perspective and wisdom that he will be able to provide, plus his modern perspective on the world of us, will prove invaluable to everybody around the globe, God willing. Now, this isn't just nostalgia talking. It's projecting the unique strengths Canada has enjoyed, thanks to the royal family, off into its future as one of the world's great and strongest democracies. It's with an eye to that future that many of us with longer life experiences say with great fondness, thank you, and God bless Queen Elizabeth II, as she, her prince, her corgis, and her horses all enjoy their eternal peace. And we will also add, with conviction and with hope, God save the King. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Durham.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's an honour for me to rise today as parliamentarians on all sides of the House remember, honour, and pay tribute to Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II, our sovereign, our head of state, Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces, a global leader, a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. I want to start as a member of the late Majesty's Privy Council and Member of Parliament to express my deepest sympathies to the royal family. While the Queen was an icon to people around the world, possibly the most recognizable figure, to them, she was a mother. She was leader of the family, and she was someone they could go to in good times and bad. I also want to pledge my allegiance, as Canada does within our constitutional monarchy, to our new King, King Charles III. Long live the King. There's been many great reflections on Her Majesty in the last week. We're still in a bit of shock, despite the fact that her 70 years on the throne led to us knowing that this day would come. It's still a very difficult day. So I looked to two of the greatest Britons for inspiration. One being the Queen, the longest-serving monarch, a great leader. The other being their longest-serving member of Parliament. At 64 years in Parliament, Sir Winston Churchill didn't reach the Platinum Jubilee levels of the Queen, but he was her first Prime Minister, and he had remarkable thoughts about the Queen that I'll share with you today. And in fact, in 1928, Winston Churchill met Princess Elizabeth at 2 years of age at Balmoral Castle. In a letter to his wife Clementine, he said this, quote, "There was no one here at all except the family, the household, and Princess Elizabeth, age 2. The last is a character, She has an air of authority and reflectiveness astonishing in an infant, end quote. Now, at that time, given a later abdication, Winston Churchill never would have thought that that young princess would be his queen, and he, her first prime minister. And what's more remarkable is the next speech I'm going to give as Canada, really the leader within the Commonwealth, particularly in the modern age, pushing within the Commonwealth to end apartheid, pushing for aid, security, trade around the world through our common bonds in the Commonwealth. In 1953, just days before the Queen's coronation, at a gathering of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association where the Queen was present, Canada was present, Winston Churchill said this, quote, "Here today we salute 50 or 60 parliaments and one crown. It is natural for parliaments to talk and for the crown to shine." He went on to say, "Well do we realize the burdens imposed by the sacred duty upon the sovereign and her family. All around, we see the proofs of the unifying force which makes the crown the central link in our modern changing life, and the one which above all others claims our allegiance to the death." The Queen did shine with a remarkable brilliance over 70 years on the throne, not just in the United Kingdom, but in Canada and around the world. And she was the central link for our parliamentary democracy for almost half of our time as an independent country. Je vais dire maintenant quelques mots en français. The Queen shone when she was here. 22 official visits, meeting millions of people, and she said this in this chamber, or the nearby chamber, for her Silver Jubilee in 1977, quote, "My happiest memories of our travels around Canada have been those individual contacts. We have revealed the enormous strength and astonishing diversity of a nation." She was the mother of all people, a title given to her in the 1950s by the Coastal Salish people in British Columbia, Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the honorary captain, honorary air commodore, or honorary colonel of 16 regiments. 34 of our commissioned ships are Her Majesty's Canadian ships. And I wear the tie today of one institution, Royal Military College, that was given her seal. One of those regiments is something that touched this Parliament not long ago, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, Princess Louise's. The Queen was their honorary colonel, going back to 1951 when she was a princess. She visited then and visited again in Hamilton in 2002 to bestow new colors on the regiment. But it's not in celebration where the Queen's leadership was evident. It was in 2014 when one of their soldiers was killed not far from here at our National War Memorial. The Queen, her letter to the regiment was the first to arrive. Her wishes were expressed to the family of Nathan Cirillo and to the regiment. And months later, she invited members of the regiment to her private apartment at Buckingham Palace, not only to express sympathies, but to inquire how the son and family of Nathan Cirillo were doing. These were not honorary titles that the Queen just took without caring about them. She was deeply committed to every institution that she was the central link to, as Winston Churchill once said. She was the Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces. My first oath to the Queen was given in 1991 at the age of 18 when I swore an oath of allegiance to the Queen. I've had that honor many times as a member of Parliament and in 2015 when I joined at the time Her Majesty's Privy Council. That central link in these institutions upon which our rich parliamentary democracy is built. She is the central link to the Great Mother, Queen Victoria, and our rights and responsibilities and the constitutional rights for Indigenous peoples in this country. She is a patron and a supporter of innumerable causes in her 22 visits to this country. Her first speech from the throne in person in Canada was years after the creation of NATO, and she has been there as our sovereign as our country grew in the modern age, from NATO to the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway, Expo 67, the Montreal Olympics, and of course, the 1982 repatriation of Canada's Constitution, which in many ways was the full circle moment for the Queen to help deliver the modern Canada on the world stage and showcase our commitment to the fundamental rights of all of our citizens in the Charter. She said this on that day, April 17th, 1982, just outside from where we are today. I am pleased and proud to be with you today, not only to celebrate the patriation of the Constitution, but to rejoice in Canada, its past, its present, and its future, end quote. So today, let's rejoice in the life of service and the leadership of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Let's remember where she shone on her visits here and around the world, and let's remember that that central link of our constitutional monarchy has provided stability, has helped build great institutions upon which we rely as Canadians. And in this Parliament, we can celebrate, debate, discuss the future of this country, knowing that it's rooted in the fertile soil of our Constitution and our roots. So today we say the Queen is dead. We celebrate and honor her life. Long live the King.
Prise de débat. Resuming debate, the Honourable Member Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm very pleased to rise today. And I know that much has been said over the last day and will continue to be said this morning in this place. And I'm glad and honored to be here to lend my thoughts about the remarkable life and service of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of the people that I represent in Barrie Innisfil. I want to begin by expressing my deep and sincere condolences to the family of Her Royal Highness and King Charles. I hope they're finding great comfort with the outpouring of love and respect on such a grand scale by all of her and now his loyal subjects in every part of the Commonwealth and indeed in all corners of the world. The Queen's passing, frankly, has been like the loss of a family member, as it should. Her Majesty is the only monarch a generation plus has known, and we've experienced every moment of her life, every joyous occasion, every triumph, every sorrow, and every challenge. I look back at just some of the historical events that our Queen has presided over in her 70 years of reigning the Commonwealth, and they are quite remarkable, and much has been said over the last couple of days about that, but it's important to highlight that her service, Madam Speaker, didn't just start with her coronation in 1953. It started well in advance of that in 1945 when the Queen joined the British military when she turned 18. She joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, as a mechanic during World War II. The Queen made a state visit to the United States where she addressed the nations of the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of the Commonwealth. Then she opened the 23rd Canadian Parliament, becoming the first monarch in Canada to open a parliamentary session. She was the first monarch to visit West Germany. And there were so many disasters, so many joys, so many triumphs. And thinking back to 1966, Madam Speaker, the Aberfan disaster, which led eventually to the 1969 Mines and Quarries Act. In 1975, Queen Elizabeth II and her husband, Prince Philip, paid their first visit to Hong Kong. And this was the first visit to Hong Kong by a reigning British monarch. As has been mentioned, she opened the 1976 Summer Olympics in Montreal. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher became the first female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, which meant the people of Great Britain had effectively two Iron Ladies. In 1982, on April 17th, Queen Elizabeth II and then Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, as well as then Minister of Justice Jean Chrétien and André Ouellette, the then Registrar General, signed the proclamation which brought the Constitution Act of 1982 into force. The proclamation confirmed that Canada had formally assumed authority over its Constitution, the final step to full sovereignty, not far from where we are today. In 1991, she addresses a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress following the coalition victory in the Gulf War. In 2015, she becomes the longest reigning British monarch, surpassing her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. And there has been sorrow, much sorrow, including the loss of her beloved husband of 74 years, Prince Philip, in 2021. And of course, this year, Madam Speaker, the Queen celebrating her Platinum Jubilee after a record of 70 years on the throne. As the most widely traveled Commonwealth monarch, Queen Elizabeth II made 22 official visits to Canada and 7 to Toronto. Her first was in 1951 as Princess Elizabeth, where she visited in place of her father, who was ill, and her last was in 2010. And through everything, she did it with strong determination, grace, humility, wisdom, loyalty, and above all, selfless service. She was also modernizing the monarchy, bringing it into the 21st century. Think for a minute, Madam Speaker, how communication and technology changed over her lifetime and how she ably adapted to that. From that first radio address pledging herself to a life of service to a recent video with Paddington Bear on the occasion of her Platinum Jubilee, she was always there to communicate and give comfort in good times and in bad. We will miss her steady hand and her confidence that no matter how bad things are, they will be better. For me, Her Majesty's eternal optimism and humility is what I will miss the most. I'm sure by now, since the Queen's passing, millions of people around the world would have seen that Paddington Bear video produced just 3 months ago for the Platinum Jubilee concert. It was one of the last times any of us saw the Queen before her passing because she was just not fit enough to attend the concert. It stated in a recent BBC article that the video was written by some of the people who worked on the Paddington films. They said, "We knew Paddington and the Queen, what they stood for, and still stand for. Very similar values. The idea that be kind and polite and the world will be right." So said co-writer James Lamont recently in a BBC Radio 5 interview. He also said it just felt very natural that those two would share a space together, that they would be both welcome because they're both cut from the same cloth. We also thought that there was some inherent comedy in the idea of Paddington, who we know is a bit of a klutz and a bit of a bull in a china shop at times, putting him in Buckingham Palace in front of the Queen, where etiquette and behavior are obviously paramount. Little did anyone know that that video, produced through the magic of television, would provide so much comfort to so many in this time of grief, but it has. There's a scene in the video where the clumsy bear, after squishing their lunch, reaches into his hat and offers Her Majesty his marmalade sandwich, his favorite, saying he always keeps one for emergencies, to which she replies after reaching into her purse, "So do I, for later." Well, Madam Speaker, today, so do I, for later. At that moment, they came together and embodied so many of the values that the world needs right now. Kindness, toleration, being kind to strangers, politeness, the things that are about one's character. And it's those values that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth embodied throughout her whole life, no matter how good or how bad things were. That is what made her so special, and it's what we should all strive to be. And today, Madam Speaker, I pledge my allegiance to King Charles III. And as I conclude, I'll leave you with the words of a clumsy, lovable bear who became an unlikely royal mascot, who has been a source of comfort and has brought a smile to people around the world during this difficult time, that many of us would have loved the chance to say to Her Majesty, "Thank you, ma'am, for everything."
Resuming debate. I'm not going to go on the issue of prop. I think that given the circumstances and that, I would just say to the member, maybe he would want to use rye bread, whole wheat bread next time. That was good. It was a very nice speech. Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The honourable member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Although it is with a heavy heart, I am deeply honoured to have the opportunity to pay tribute to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of my constituents in Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek. Over this past week, many have publicly reflected on her life, her steadfast loyalty and service to both her country and the Commonwealth. Queen Elizabeth II embodied quiet strength and dutiful leadership, with her life of service starting before she acceded the throne. As a princess, she began conducting ceremonial duties from the age of 14, beginning with a radio broadcast in 1940. While Britain was at war and their homeland was under attack, the young princess stepped into her role to help boost her morale, as she and her sister had been evacuated out of the city to Windsor due to the bombing of London. Once she turned 18, towards the end of World War II, she joined the Army to become a mechanic, something I know has endeared her to my father, a fellow mechanic. On the morning of her passing, he called me, first to ensure I was watching the news, then to reflect on meeting her when he was 10 years old in 1951 during her visit to Saskatoon before becoming Queen. The affection my father, a man from rural Saskatchewan, held for the Queen is but one example of how close many Canadians across the country felt to her. I also heard from Dolores, who shared meeting the Queen in Saskatoon at the synchrotron. In her words, the Queen graciously stopped to talk to a number of people, especially the kids who were along the path, even asking her nephew if he was having a good day. She also noted how genuine her smile was. During her birthday radio broadcast for her 21st birthday, the Queen dedicated her life, or she dedicated her life, to the service of the Commonwealth. At such a young age, she knew the importance of a life of service and carrying out her duties. Now, looking back, we can see that this oath was dutifully and thoroughly fulfilled. This spirit of service carried on into her reign as Queen and included serving as the royal patron or president of over 600 charities, professional bodies, and public organizations, including many in Canada. She served as both our head of state and the head of our armed forces. In all these roles, she embodied grace and humility. Where many may have faltered, the Queen flourished. We know that Canada held a special place in her heart, as she once referred to it as home, and it was her most visited country. We also know that this feeling was reciprocated by many Canadians. Indeed, Canada has benefited greatly from the steady hand of the Queen in her role as our monarch. During the time of her reign, Canada underwent a significant transformation. She oversaw our growth as a nation, its growing pains and transition to a fully independent country, including the creation of our nation's constitution. As others have remarked, Queen Elizabeth II was a comforting constant in a world of continuous change, a true stateswoman. Ever mindful of her duty, in her final public statement shortly before she passed, the Queen spoke to the people of Saskatchewan, and in particular the communities of James Smith Cree Nation and Weldon, extending her condolences to all those who lost loved ones, and prayers for those recovering from their injuries as a result of the horrific attacks that occurred in our province. She served with humility and dignity, offering an ideal to strive for, and a reminder for us here in this place that we too endeavor to serve an ideal above ourselves. During a radio broadcast eulogizing King George VI, Winston Churchill, the first British Prime Minister to serve under Queen Elizabeth II, said, "Famous have been the reigns of our queens. Some of the greatest periods in our history have unfolded under their scepter." Such prophetic words, as we now know, that Queen Elizabeth II continued that lineage of remarkable female monarchs. Hers was a reign of stability and will be reflected upon with great admiration and affection. Her memory will live on as one of the greatest monarchs in our nation's history. Finally, Her late Majesty, the Queen, was a woman of faith. During her Christmas broadcasts, she often remarked on its importance in her life, how it sustained her, and asked for prayers for wisdom and strength. Today, I offer my sincerest condolences to the royal family in this difficult time. I pray that they will be comforted and strengthened as they grieve the passing of our beloved Queen, their mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. God bless Queen Elizabeth. Long live the King.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to rise today and pay tribute to Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, on behalf of the people of Flamborough-Glanbrook and indeed the greater Hamilton area. But I also do so with a heavy heart. First and foremost, we, her loyal subjects, offer our most sincere condolences to the entire royal family. May strength be given to all of you at this time. Madam Speaker, in the next few minutes, I would like to share some of the thoughts that people in the Hamilton area have offered me in the past week as they grieve the loss of our Queen. Madam Speaker, Her late Majesty officially visited Hamilton 3 times during her lifetime. First as Princess Elizabeth in 1951, then twice as Queen in 1959 and in 2002. Each time it was an honor for our city to receive her. Her late Majesty was Colonel-in-Chief of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, a regiment based in Hamilton. And the Honourable Member for Durham just spoke about the very special bond that the Queen had with the Argylls and the Argylls had with the Queen, and her very deep caring on the tragic events of 2014 with the shooting of Nathan Cirillo of Hamilton. The Argylls featured prominently in all her visits, most notably in her Golden Jubilee year, 2002, when she presented them with new colors at a large public ceremony in what was then Copps Coliseum in downtown Hamilton. And while the ceremony was all service and duty for which she was known, her charisma shone through when she spoke to the overflow crowd and in her individual conversations with veterans. Her broad smile always told the story. Madam Speaker, please allow me to convey the reflections of the people of Flamborough, and beyond. Over the course of the week, constituents have shared their recollections of their encounters with the Queen that they love so much. One lady has a Viewmaster disc, and some of us will remember what those are, of the Queen's coronation. And she holds this and treasures it very much this week in her memory. Another remembers meeting the Queen as a brownie under the Girl Guides in Edmonton. Treasured photos are on display or have been taken out from the drawers in which they've been tucked away of grandmothers, uncles, aunts dressed in their Sunday best to be presented to Her late Majesty. And for so many, the Queen's annual Christmas message is a warm memory, is often there where her best qualities of compassion, charm, and wit were most evident. I've also heard from descendants of United Empire Loyalists, and they have a natural bond and a natural affinity with the monarchy, and they are so proud that Queen Elizabeth II upheld that institution with such grace, composure, and elegance during what were often trying times for our world. And in addition, those affiliated with the Argylls continue to express their eternal gratitude to Her late Majesty for visiting each time she was in Hamilton, for caring so deeply at the tragedies that they experienced, and for making them such an important part of her life as their commanding officer. Madam Speaker, if I may add my own memories to those of the constituents that I've been honored to represent and speak on behalf of here. I was also blessed to meet Her Majesty in 2002. It was a 12-day Golden Jubilee tour of Canada where she was celebrating 50 years on the throne. And the Government of Ontario at that time held a large royal reception at the National Trade Centre in Toronto. There were people lined on both sides of the aisle as the royal couple made their way around the room. While my own time with our beloved Queen was not more than a quick hello, because on the opposite side of the aisle to me, there were people with horses, and she was naturally drawn to go speak to those people and to see the horses, as that was one of her loves. I did have a more fulsome conversation with Prince Philip, and he exuded all the charm that he was also known for. In fact, Madam Speaker, the tie that I'm wearing here today is the tie I wore that day in 2002. I bought it especially for the royal visit, and it has remained one of my favorite ties, and even more so now. This is the first time I've worn it since her passing, and I will continue to think of her as I do today every time I wear it. Madam Speaker, let me close with the thoughts of a successful woman and leader from Hamilton who remembers the Queen for much more than the service and duty for which she has been so rightly credited. This woman, now in her early 40s, is leading an important organization in her chosen profession. And for her, the Queen has always been a role model all her life. A woman in a powerful leadership role that she could look up to at a time when that was so rare. And Madam Speaker, I know this same point has been made by members on both sides of this House already in the past couple days, but I think it bears repeating and amplifying. For this individual, and doubtless millions of girls and young women, the Queen was an inspiration. As head of state, her constant presence told them they could dream big and do anything. And so even though she was born into this royal role, and she chose to define it from the outset as lifelong service and duty, she broke that glass ceiling at a time that just didn't happen. It's that major accomplishment that has stuck with this young woman that I spoke with the other day, and it is the enduring memory of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Madam Speaker, we will miss her dearly. In a world where the pace of change accelerates by the day, she was a constant. We now look to His Majesty Queen Charles III, to whom I pledge allegiance, to carry on that legacy. May God save the King. May God continue to bless Canada.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Madam Speaker, I rise in this place during this solemn time to express my deepest sympathies and condolences to the members of the royal family and to all those in the Commonwealth as we collectively mourn the passing of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. As the Member of Parliament for Niagara Falls riding, which includes the City of Niagara Falls and the towns of Niagara-on-the-Lake and Fort Erie, it is my sincere honor to be able to stand in my place today to pay tribute to our beloved Queen after her death on September 8th at 96 years of age. For 70 incredible years, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was Canada's head of state. In fact, her tenure lasted for 45% of Canada's 155-year history. Given this, she oversaw many of our country's most significant events of the 20th and 21st centuries. She reigned for an incredible period of time and did so with dignity, grace, honor, and a profound sense of duty and service. For many, their understanding of monarchy and the Queen and her relationship to Canada is limited to such things as portraits adorning walls of government buildings or recognizing her face and her name on our currency. But in a real sense, it is much more profound than that. Peter McNally, a retired McGill University Information Studies professor, recently spoke with CTV News, and he had this to say, and I quote, "Today, the monarchy is the living embodiment of Canada's parliamentary traditions. And this parliamentary tradition is one which can trace its roots back over 800 years ago. The monarchy in Canada, as represented by the Queen for 70 years and as currently represented by King Charles III, is fundamental in our everyday lives and way of life in Canada, even if it is not explicitly apparent on a day-to-day basis. In fact, many Canadian leaders have acknowledged the importance and continued relevance of the Crown in our daily lives. In 1993, the Honourable Mike Harris, former Premier of Ontario, noted, and I quote, "The oath to the Queen is fundamental to the administration of law in this country. It signifies that here in Canada, justice is done not in the name of the Prime Minister or the mayors or the police chief, as in some totalitarian nations, but by the people in the name of the Queen. Rather than being offensive, I submit that it is one of the hallmarks of our society that attracts people to Canada." A year before that, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, former Prime Minister of Canada, stated, and I quote, "The Crown has symbolized a continuity in the values of decency, fairness, and equality before the law that have made this country great. And no sovereign has served her Canadian subjects with more grace, more concern, and more goodwill than has Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen's sense of duty, her courage, warmth, and her honour are known and appreciated by all Canadians. In an ever-evolving world and in a sea of constant change, we could always look to Queen Elizabeth II to find our balance, stability, and our courage. She was always a beacon of hope in dark times and comforting and a calming presence. Her leadership was constant and steady, fulfilling the promise she made on her 21st birthday while on a trip to South Africa with her family, when she indicated, and I quote, "I declare before all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family, to which we all belong." During her life, Her Majesty visited Canada more than 20 times between 1951 and 2010. She visited Canada more than any other nation in the Commonwealth. In fact, her first visit to Canada included a visit to my beautiful riding of Niagara Falls, just 3 months before she would ascend to the throne. At that time, given her father's declining health, her tour carried an official proclamation: should the King pass away while she was on tour. According to the Niagara Falls Public Library archives, during her visit to Niagara, she described the views of Niagara Falls as magnificent and tremendous as she stood at the railing of the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. It was estimated that a crowd of 150,000 people in Niagara Falls cheered the royals throughout their visit before they boarded the royal train to continue their tour across Canada. In February 1952, her father, King George VI, passed away, and Princess Elizabeth immediately assumed the throne as our queen. And she has been our queen ever since. And for millions upon millions of Canadians, myself included, Queen Elizabeth II was the only head of state we had ever known until now, upon King Charles III assuming the throne. Queen Elizabeth's visit to Niagara Falls took place in 1973. Well, her next visit took place in 1973. This was her first visit as queen. She was on tour with her husband, Prince Philip, to open the world-renowned Shaw Festival in Niagara-on-the-Lake and to visit nearby Fort George, an important military post from the War of 1812. One constituent recently shared his memories of the Queen's Niagara-on-the-Lake visit in 1973 with the St. Catharines Standard. Ken Bridgman of St. David's in Niagara-on-the-Lake wrote he was the general manager of the Pillar and Post Inn at the time of the royal couple's visit. Mr. Bridgman, along with MPP Robert Welch and John Dropey, the owner and founder of the Pillar and Post, met with the royal couple as they entered the inn, and they both had the privilege of escorting the royal couple to their rooms. During the walk, Mr. Bridgman recalled the royals expressed interest in the origins of the old building, the impact of the Shaw Festival on tourism and employment in the town, the history of Niagara-on-the-Lake, and other current events. He called the royal couple engaging and noted that they were most complimentary of their rooms once they arrived. In the same article of Memories and Recollections of the Royal Visits to Canada, my predecessor, the Honourable Rob Nicholson, also made a submission that was published. Mr. Nicholson served as the Member of Parliament for Niagara Falls riding for over 24 years. He wrote that he and his wife Arlene and their daughter Christine had the privilege of meeting the Queen at the Royal York Hotel in Toronto in June of 2010, while he was serving as Canada's Justice Minister and Attorney General. They had a beautiful picture taken, and he noted that the Queen was genuinely warm and friendly, and it was quite evident that she loved being in Canada. Given its immense beauty and rich history and nation building, Niagara has had a strong track record of attracting royal visits to the area. Other visits happened long before Queen Elizabeth was even born. The first visit was as early as 1860, when the first planned illumination of Niagara Falls took place in honor of the visit of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII. 19 years later, in 1879, Niagara Falls was illuminated again in honor of a visit of Princess Louise and her husband, the Marquis of Lorne, the fourth Governor General of Canada. In the fall of 1901, the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and York, the future King George V, and Queen Mary visited Niagara Falls. And since that time, Niagara Falls has been pleased to play host to visits by the Prince of Wales and future King Edward VIII in 1919 and 1927, Their Majesties King George VI and Queen Elizabeth in 1939, the Duchess of Kent in 1954, Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret in 1958, Princess Diana, Prince William, and Prince Harry in 1991, and Her Royal Highness Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, in 2012. Queen Elizabeth made her final trip to Canada in 2010 at the age of 84. While Niagara is a popular destination for royals, we are all going to greatly miss the visits from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Her memory will always live on and be treasured by all those who appreciated her. Through the remainder of the 10-day mourning period between 10:30 and midnight in the Eastern Time Zone, Niagara Falls will be illuminated in royal blue in tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. This tribute will happen nightly and conclude on the date of her funeral on September 19th. I invite all Canadians and international visitors who are able to come and witness it as a way to pay your respects in her memory. Niagara Falls holds many important connections to the royal family and Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. We will always remember her, and we will always treasure those memories of her and her devoted service to the monarchy, the Commonwealth, and to Canada. It has been a great honor for me to pay my respects to all those mourning our great loss through this tribute to Queen Elizabeth II. May you rest in peace, Your Majesty. Long live the King.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Madam Speaker, I would want to, before I start, underscore the horrific violence that members of the community of the James Smith Cree Nation in the town of Weldon suffered just a few days ago, and that pain and suffering in those communities is difficult to describe. And for those families, I think, as a number of us have expressed over the course of the last few days, for all those victims and their families, they are in our hearts and in our minds at this time. We are speaking of the legacy of Queen Elizabeth, Madam Speaker. And it's difficult to encapsulate the life of someone who had such an impact on so many people in a few minutes, even in this place. We are sometimes challenged to really encapsulate a life that had so much impact on so many of us. And I know my colleagues have all spoken with great eloquence. What I would like to do today is relate more of a personal impression of Queen Elizabeth II. There is the institution, of course, Madam Speaker, and ultimately, at some point, there will be discussions around that institution, but there is, above all, the person. And the person, Queen Elizabeth II, Her Majesty, was somebody who was very engaged, who brought immense stability to our parliamentary system and to our democracies, and showed incredible dedication. Madam Speaker, Queen Elizabeth II visited the community of New Westminster 3 times through her long reign. She visited the community of Burnaby twice over that same period. And each time that she came, and I will mention more specifically some of the reflections of people in my community in a moment, each time that she came, she was fully engaged and provided a remarkably memorable visit in both New Westminster and in Burnaby. But before I get to those personal reflections, I wanted to talk about the great gifts that Queen Elizabeth II really provided to us. And I think foremost is that of the stability that she brought through her long reign, the longest reign by a monarch in recent times, 70 years. And I think we sometimes take that for granted, Madam Speaker, that the passage, the seamless passage from one institution to the next, the seamless passage of the monarchy, the Queen passing away, and within hours, King Charles III being crowned, the stability that came from having a head of state that welcomed and inaugurated 15 governments in the United Kingdom, a dozen governments through her representative here in Canada. We sometimes take for granted that stability of passage, that seamless passage from one government to the next, democratically elected, and her continuing reign as head of state, and even the seamless passage from the head of state as she passed away to her successor. This is not something we should take for granted, Madam Speaker, particularly in this day and age. We have only to look at the chaotic violence on January 6th, 2021 in the United States from a man who promotes despotic values that that chaotic violence is a strict contrast and a wake-up call, I think, for us to never take for granted the stability that Queen Elizabeth personified, passing from one to the next, passing from one government to the next, always respecting those fundamental values, the democratic values that we all hold dear. Secondly, Queen Elizabeth II really embodied the spirit of dedication. And I think the best example, as so many of my colleagues have said over the past 24 hours as we've been paying tribute to her in this House of Commons, is the fact that 48 hours before her death, at a time when surely she was aware that her time, her hours were numbered on this earth, she still was able to welcome the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Truss, 48 hours before she passed. And that dedication, putting her role and the importance of her position before all else, is something that a number of people have commented on as well. It's important to note that that continuity is also something that comes from the presence of Queen Elizabeth II in so many aspects of our life. And it's important to note that primarily in the many comments that have followed her passing, that new Canadians who have taken an oath of citizenship to her have often been the ones who've been, I think, the strongest in terms of providing comments and talking about the person of Queen Elizabeth and her impact on their lives. But above all, she was engaged, Madam Speaker, and I wanted to relate a personal anecdote in 1971, one of her numerous visits to New Westminster, where I and my classmates, at the time 9 years old, danced before the May Day festivities in front of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. All of us were nervous before we got up to dance. And afterwards, all of us thought that the Queen had been watching us. And I just last weekend sat down with a number of my classmates from that time, Becky DeWinitz, Debbie Ney Cook, Kathy Ney Gifford. All of us, even now, today, 50 years after the event, all felt that the Queen was very much focused on us during that event. And this is something that is absolutely part of people's reaction to Queen Elizabeth and her engagement with people wherever she went in the Commonwealth. Madam Speaker, over the last few days at Century House, that was actually inaugurated by Princess Margaret in 1958 in New Westminster, there have been books of condolences that have been signed by my constituents. When we inaugurated the first day last Monday, Madam Speaker, there was a lineup right out the door. And people have been coming throughout the week to sign a book of condolences, to send messages to the royal family and send messages of condolences. There was Lorraine Holmes, who is in a motorized wheelchair and has a half-hour trek to get to Century House, but she felt it so important to sign that book of condolences. She wanted to pass on her condolences and her memories of Queen Elizabeth II. There's Rachel and many people from across the Lower Mainland. Rachel took 2 hours through buses from Tsawwassen to come to New Westminster to sign that book, and we've had people from out the Lower Mainland lined up to sign the book and to express their condolences. I wanted to read one passage from Colleen Vogler and family. Thank you, Your Majesty, for being the best example to the world of how to live one's life as a leader, monarchy, in monarchy, a mother, a wife, a grandmother, and great-grandmother, and a woman. You were wise, intelligent, devoted, kind, loving, and had a terrific sense of humor. You kept the world in sync so that you had them keep on calm and carry on. There's one more angel in heaven. There's one more star in the sky. Blessings, hugs to the family and all who knew her. God bless the Queen. From Colleen Vogler and family, so many of the same expression that was expressed by so many as they came to sign the book of condolences. Madam Speaker, there is no doubt, as the member from Burnaby South said in his speech yesterday, that there is an important role for King Charles III now to play in reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And I repeat the call of our leader, the member from Burnaby South, that King Charles III must strive for reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and to look to a royal proclamation of reconciliation. It is something that is fundamental and must be a priority for our new monarch. Madam Speaker, I'm reminded of the phrase from Thornton Wilder, who said, "The highest tribute is not grief, but gratitude." We are profoundly grateful for the service of Queen Elizabeth II, to the stability that she brought through her long reign, through her dedication and devotion expressed up until hours before her passing, and to how engaged she was with people in her visits to my communities of New Westminster and Burnaby, but also to everyone she met through her long reign. We are grateful for all that she contributed to our democracy and to the institution. She will be missed.
Resuming debate, the honourable for Saskatoon West.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's an honor for me to rise today and pay my respects to the late Queen Elizabeth II. She was the only monarch that I've ever known, and I'm saddened by her passing. This will be a time of great adjustment, not just for our institutions and our country, but for individuals like myself. Much has been said over the past week as the world has been mourning her passing, and many words have been said right here in this chamber over the last 2 days. Rather than repeat a bunch of facts, I want to share my own personal connection to the Queen. I didn't grow up in a privileged home where my father had regular audiences with the Queen. Rather, I grew up like most Canadians in a modest family, learning about the Queen in school. I remember singing "God Save the Queen" with my classmates every morning in school to start the day. I also remember my parents telling me that they sang "God Save the King" when they went to school, which seemed so strange to me at the time. I spoke with them just this week, and they recounted how difficult it was for them to switch from singing about the King to singing about the Queen. And now, years later, I'm the one who has to change my thought process from Queen to King. It's not easy. And of course, my parents, who are now in their 80s, now have to change back from Queen to King. It's going to take some getting used to. Another connection most of us have with the Queen is our money. Her image is on nearly every coin and bill that we use, as well as stamps and other forms of payment. I can't imagine the complication and cost that it will be to change that over, but I'm sure it'll take a long time. It will be very interesting, though, when we start to see those first coins, bills, and stamps with the image of the King rather than the Queen. Another connection we all share was the visits that she made to Canada. She visited Canada more times than any other country. Her Majesty's first visit to Canada happened right in my constituency of Saskatoon West during her time serving as Princess in 1951, before she became the Queen. She would later go on to visit Saskatchewan 5 more times in her capacity as Queen, creating a strong bond with the people of my province. She visited Canada a total of 22 times. One of these visits was particularly meaningful to me. Her last visit to Canada was in 2010, and I had the privilege of being in Ottawa during that visit. Through a connection with my MP, the member for Carleton Trail Eagle Creek, I was able to get tickets for a garden party at Rideau Hall where the Queen would attend. Given that there were hundreds of people at this event, and she was 84 years old at the time, I wasn't sure how close that I would get to her. To my amazement, she and Prince Philip made a lengthy walk through the garden, stopping to chat with many, many people. My moment of fame was a fleeting glance. She and I locked eyes for just a second as she slowly walked past my wife and I. Obviously, she couldn't speak with anyone, and that fleeting glance would have to do for me. Yet in that glance, I felt her warmness, and I felt her care. Prince Philip followed behind her, as he always did, and he stopped to talk with a veteran right nearby. I was able to listen in on that conversation and experience the care that he had, especially for veterans. I also attended the massive Canada Day rally on Parliament Hill where the Queen was present and spoke. I remember the moment that she arrived on the hill. I was looking up at the Canadian flag up on the Peace Tower, and I glanced away for just a second, and when I looked back, I saw the monarch flag up there. I still have no idea how they changed the flag so quickly. She must have had some very special powers. She certainly had a way of making everyone feel important and cared for. Whether you saw her on TV, whether you walked past her or whether you shared a moment's glance, and I'm sure that many Canadians can relate to this. Through times of triumph and disaster, the Queen has always been there for Canadians. She was there in 1967 for our centennial anniversary, and in 1982 to sign the historic proclamation of Canada's Constitution. She also guided former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney in his work to abolish apartheid in South Africa and to free Nelson Mandela in 1990. And one of her final acts was to issue her condolences to the people of Saskatchewan, to the people of James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, after the tragic events of the Labor Day weekend. And so, Madam Speaker, we start a new chapter, one with a king instead of a queen. I congratulate King Charles III on his ascension to the throne, and I look forward to all the changes that will happen over the next few years, like seeing the king on our currency and our stamps. But for now, we mourn the Queen, a Queen who has served the Commonwealth through 7 decades and 12 Canadian Prime Ministers, including Saskatchewan's very own John Diefenbaker. In fact, in 1957, during Prime Minister Diefenbaker's first year in office, Queen Elizabeth visited Canada and read the speech from the throne herself. In a world of constant change, she was the one steady figure that Canadians could rely on. Hers was a life well lived. I know that I speak for all of my constituents back home in honoring the life of a queen who gave so much of herself for the Commonwealth. I offer her family my sincerest condolences and the condolences of everyone in Saskatoon West. Queen Elizabeth II, may you rest in peace with your beloved husband by your side, as always. Long live the King.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to pay homage to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who lived a life of selfless service to her people here in Canada and across the Commonwealth. For 70 years, she reigned as sovereign with unparalleled grace, dignity, and prudence, which was carried at a standard so high that it was uniquely hers. Through times of tragedy and hardship, or joy and renewal, she was there, like the North Star at night or the rising sun in the morning, a quiet, unwavering constant. But with her supreme prudence, Her late Majesty knew exactly when to step forward and deliver the exact message that people needed to hear. And this started at the age of 14 for her, as a child, when she was broadcast across the Commonwealth to reassure children, particularly the British, during the Blitz, that they would be victorious. And it would be up to their generation to rebuild the world. And right through to her pandemic address, where she reassured us all that we would meet again. I stand here as the Member of Parliament for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes, a riding that has a proud history as United Empire Loyalists, and had the great honor and privilege of hosting Her late Majesty in 1984. A brief aside, that's the year that I was born and was not in attendance at this historic event. She visited Fort Wellington in Prescott for a demonstration by the War of 1812 reenactors. Many locals went out to greet their queen, and she enjoyed her first time at Fort Wellington so much that she decided to stay well past her scheduled time to inspect the formation of the soldiers. Now, when the soldiers at the demonstration fired the large cannon at the fort, as they love to do, Her late Majesty reacted saying, quote, "I must say that gives a jolly good bang." That quote became so famous locally that the gun in question was adorned with a plaque to memorialize the moment. Now, in 2010, I was thrilled to join my fellow Canadians for Canada Day celebrations here on Parliament Hill, and I was with my wife, Amanda. We heard an address from many great folks, and of course, from Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Now, as she moved from the stage down Parliament Hill, past the Centennial Flame, to her awaiting carriage, I was able to stand at the barricades and exchange a wave, which I've got to say, I was delighted to be able to have that brief second. And in reflecting in the last week on all of the many occasions like this that so many Canadians had, I learned that Queen Elizabeth II was seen by more Canadians in person than any human in history. It's remarkable, visiting towns, hamlets, villages, cities. These visits had moments that made us forget human mortality and forget that of our sovereign. For a fleeting second, where we thought that just maybe she would always be there because she always has been. And so now, as I reflect upon a life of service well lived, I recall the times that I've sworn allegiance to our sovereign. First, as a member of our Canadian Armed Forces, then as a municipal councillor, and each of the 3 times following my election to Canada's Parliament. I'm so proud to say that my family and I have been subjects of Her late Majesty every single day of our lives, and that we are better for it. Canada is better for having been under her reign for 7 decades. I'm delighted to teach my children about that lifetime of service given to us by Queen Elizabeth II. Her legacy will live on in our memory and, of course, in history, and we'll be forever grateful for her service. May God speed Queen Elizabeth. May God bless Canada. God save the King.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And before I begin, I'd like to give my deepest condolences on behalf of the constituents of Sturgeon River Parkland for those lost at the James Smith Cree Nation. Sturgeon River Parkland is home to many First Nations and Métis people, including the Enoch Cree Nation and the Alexander Cree Nation. And I know the events that took place in Saskatchewan have hit all of my constituents, particularly those in those communities, very hard. I also wish to give condolences on behalf of the constituents of Sturgeon River Parkland to Her late Majesty, pay respect to Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and give my condolences to His Majesty King Charles III and his family on their loss. Queen Elizabeth is the only monarch I have ever known, and the only monarch that most Canadians have lived under. The Queen has touched all of our lives in so many ways, not only because of her many visits to this country, or because her portrait hangs on our walls, or because her image is stamped on our currency, but most significantly, she has touched all of us through her character and her life of service to the Commonwealth. In a rapidly changing world, we have seen so many traditions go by the wayside. The world is a far different place than it was back in 1952 when Her Majesty ascended the throne. And while many of those changes have been to the betterment of humankind, I think some could be forgiven for feeling a sense of confusion about their place in the world and how things should be. And that is one reason why the reign of Her Majesty these past 7 decades has been such a source of strength for so many. For if someone were to have traveled in time from 1952 to the present day, they may be overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of societal change, but comforted by the ever-present foundation of our constitutional monarchy, which was embodied in Her Majesty and has remained unchanged through all this time. Her Majesty was a good queen. She left the institution intact, and if anything, increased the prestige of the monarchy during a time when many countries have radically changed their systems of government, often to the detriment of their citizens. She was someone that we could look to as above the common politics of our day-to-day, someone who carried a legacy stretching back through hundreds of years of our shared history to our present day. And as we see the continuation of that legacy through the accession of King Charles III to the throne, I believe we can feel assured that the future of our constitutional monarchy and our country and commonwealth are in good hands. We can feel confident that we have a king who, like his mother, our dear late Queen, exemplified a commitment to a lifetime of service to his people. In closing, I am proud to have been a subject of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and I reaffirm my oath, both given as a Member of Parliament and as an officer in Canada's Armed Forces, to bear true allegiance to her heirs and successors. May His Majesty's rule, with the grace of God, continue to be a blessing to our country. God save the King.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In each of our lives, we all have those moments where we remember where we were when we first heard about significant events. Last Thursday, I was at the Kelowna International Airport having just gone through security when I noticed a missed call from a member of my team, and then a text message to tell me the news. Her Majesty Elizabeth II, our Queen and Head of State since 1952, had sadly passed away. As I walked through the airport, I could hear the whispers as others learned the breaking news. It was only the day before, on September 7th, in Kelowna, that I hosted a Queen's Jubilee Pin and Local Recognition Service Medallion ceremony. The Canadian Platinum Jubilee emblem was created to mark the 70th anniversary of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's ascension to the throne, a historic milestone in the enduring relationship between Canada and the Crown. At the end of the ceremony, we finished by standing and singing, "O Canada," and "God Save the Queen." Little did we know then that it would likely be the last time "God Save the Queen" would be played in our community. For most in Kelowna Lake Country, we have never known a Canada without the Queen. The first official rendition of "God Save the King" after the Queen's passing was sung at the end of a memorial service for Queen Elizabeth II at St. Paul's Cathedral in London on September 9th. We are currently in a national period of mourning, which lasts for 10 days. I will be attending the national commemorative ceremony in honor of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of the citizens of Kelowna Lake Country. Through 7 decades and 12 prime ministers, she represented an island in the stream of our ever-changing culture and history in Canada. The Queen represented the eternal values of dutiful service, quiet strength, and genuine kindness. The Queen often talked about the importance to her of faith, family, and friendship. I recently spoke with Bob Hayes, former president of the Kelowna branch of the Okanagan Historical Society, who remembers when the Queen came to Kelowna on May 6, 1971. He recalled how in Kelowna City Park there were very large wooden stands, which were a regular fixture there at the time, and more were added for the event. Viewers could tell when the Queen was arriving as they could see her cavalcade coming across the Okanagan Lake Bridge into Kelowna. The Queen made a brief speech to the large crowd and then took time to walk around speaking to people. In 1983, the Queen landed at the Kelowna International Airport while on another British Columbia visit. It was 45 years later from the Queen's visit to downtown Kelowna that we received a visit from the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, now the Prince and Princess of Wales. I was out of town at the time, but my husband and son got to see them, and as did many others in the area as they toured around. Let us keep Queen Elizabeth II and what she stood for in our memories. God save the King. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians' hearts are heavy as we remember our Queen, Elizabeth II.
During her visits to this country, she touched so many lives. To the world, she have been the Queen of England. She was also very much the Queen of Canada. Even though they never met the Queen, she impacted my wife's parents in a deeply personal way. Like so many have done, Sam and Rabha came to Canada as immigrants from a country outside the British Commonwealth. They did not grow up with Canadian traditions. Having a monarch was new to them. They were seeking a new life, a better life, and were determined to embrace all that Canada can offer. They had seen news coverage of the royal visit to Canada when their daughter was born on the anniversary of the Queen's coronation. My father-in-law insisted their new daughter be named Elizabeth in honor of Her Majesty. They wrote to the Queen at the Buckingham Palace to tell her of the event. In the past week, thousands of people around the world have paid tribute to Elizabeth II. I'm not sure there is anything that I could say that would add to those words. She was an inspiration to all of us in public life, leading by example, following traditions she learned as a child. She understood the concepts of service and duty in ways that we would do all want to emulate. One of the Queen's strengths was her humility. The word Queen brings to mind someone exalted above ordinary people. Yet, as thousands of Canadians who met her can tell you, Elizabeth II was deeply concerned with and interested in people, no matter where they came from or their social status. Her Christian faith infused her interactions with others. Our nation has lost someone who, for most of us, has been a constant presence for all of our lives. We knew her death was inevitable at some point, but we secretly believed that she would live forever. In this period of mourning, we feel somewhat adrift on an uncharted ocean. We are not alone in those feelings. Elizabeth II was not just the Queen, not just the head of the Commonwealth, not just a symbol of enduring stability in a turbulent world. She was also a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, and her loss is felt by her family more deeply than by any of us. To King Charles III and the rest of the royal family, the hearts of Canadians are with you in this time of mourning. Thank you for sharing your mother and grandmother with us. Canada and the world are richer because of her. May God comfort you as you mourn. Thank you.
Thank you for that intervention. Continuing debate, the honourable member for Essex.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, as great as it is to get back to this House, it's obviously it's a sad day. It's a sad day to have to come back to this House to truly celebrate all that that the Queen did for Canada and, truthfully, Mr. Speaker, continues to do for Canada and the world. And I suppose then I'll retract my statement and say, what an exciting day. What a fabulous day. And what an honor it is for me to stand here today on behalf of the amazing folks of Essex and speak to her presence, speak to all that she did, and speak to thank all that she presented. So much has already been said, Mr. Speaker. So I'm not going to speak about all the rest of the things that so many great folks have said in this House, but Of course, I'll start out by saying that my thoughts and prayers, the people of Essex thoughts and prayers, are of course with the royal family, Mr. Speaker, and all of the people that she represented. I suppose her hope, her passion, and compassion for 96 years, if it doesn't put some energy, a smile on the face of Canadians, then I think you need to take a hard look in the mirror and realize that what she brought to this world is something so unique, is something so heartwarming, and something that we can all take a page out of her playbook, Mr. Speaker. I guess I really didn't realize the impact that she had on folks until I was honored to present so many fine folks from Essex and the surrounding area with her Queen's Jubilee pins. I had zero idea the impact that she had, and not only from older folks, but from young folks as well. And to have the honor to put on the Queen's Jubilee pin and have somebody literally cry on your shoulder and say it's the greatest honor of their life, Mr. Speaker, is, it blew my mind. And that's when the impact happened. And Mr. Speaker, only 3 days later, the Queen, Her Majesty, the Queen Elizabeth II, passed away. I kind of think it's by design. I'm going to speak very quickly, Mr. Speaker, to something that a lot of Canadians don't know, and probably most of my colleagues don't even realize, but I'm a very proud United Empire Loyalist, Mr. Speaker, a UEL. And I spoke with Heather Crew just 2 days ago, and I asked her, can you give me some ideas and give me some thoughts about what the UEL, what the Queen meant to the UEL. And so I want to just share just a few thoughts here, Mr. Speaker, to really bring it into perspective, back for my community, back for Essex. And I'll share something pretty unique and neat with you here shortly. So Heather sent me a briefing here. So the Bicentennial Branch was founded in 1984 and derives its name from the 200th anniversary of the final evacuation of Loyalist refugees from Manhattan in 1784. Loyalists from across the 13 colonies had gathered on Manhattan Island, which at the time was the last stronghold of the British following the Revolution. In 1983, a handful of UE, so United Empire Loyalist, holders from the Windsor-Essex region began to discuss the formation of a local UELAC branch. They were encouraged in those efforts by John Chard, who was a member of Dominion Council and editor of the Loyalist Gazette, of which I get basically every month. The first general meeting of the new branch took place on May 31st, 1984 in the Windsor Public Library. Charter members were Sharon Gominar, Marie Gordon, Gwyneth Malkin, Jean Walton, Marilyn Courtney, Eleanor MacDonald, Donna Harvey, Alice Pollock, and Margaret Lewis. Margaret Lewis was my grandfather. It was my grandmother. My grandmother, Mr. Speaker. She was absolutely instrumental. She adored the Queen. My late grandmother, she passed away just a few years ago. And if it was possible, she would have had a Queen's Jubilee pin put on her lapel as well. Today, Bicentennial Branch serves Windsor, Essex County, Chatham, Kent, and Michigan. However, our members can be found throughout North America. Most members have family ties with the Loyalists who settled this area in the years following the American Revolution, although some members have proven Loyalist ancestors from other parts of Canada. Heather went on to say, Mr. Speaker, that 1 in 6 Canadians actually have ties to the Loyalists, and most don't realize that they do. Ontario's coat of arms, Mr. Speaker. Ontario's coat of arms was adopted in 1909, illustrating Ontario's ties to England and its loyalty to Canada. The deer, Moose and bear are the most common mammals indigenous to Ontario. The Latin motto, and this is going to be good, Ut incept fidelis sic permanent, translates to loyal she began, loyal she remains. This is in reference to the loyalist ties of the province's early settlers. In closing, Madam Speaker, I guess why I'm so excited to be here today, and not because of her passing, but because of the opportunity to speak to an individual, a woman that's done so much good for Canada. But I think that I do my best to do what I believe that she exemplified, and that's to leave the world a better place than we found it. And she's done that time and time and time again. You can see it through the tears, you can see it through the smiles, you see it through the laughter, and you see it through the respect, Mr. Speaker. It's remarkable that through her life, she brought so much to this world. And I guess what's equally remarkable, Mr. Speaker, in that through her death, she has certainly exemplified exactly that. So, Mr. Speaker, in closing, again, it's been an honor to speak my thoughts and prayers with the royal family in all aspects going forward. Godspeed the Queen, God save the King, and God bless Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I want to thank the member for his intervention. The next speaker will be the honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's truly a privilege to stand here today in commemoration of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of the residents of Red Deer Lacombe. And Mr. Speaker, there's things that we always say as folks. We say, we wish you a successful life, we wish you a long life. Rarely do we see people get both. And Her Majesty the Queen certainly had a long life. And through her 70 years as the monarch and in her years prior to that as a princess, she certainly has been impactful. Probably the most well-known person in the world, not just for a brief period of time, but for most of her entire life. And in her lifetime, the Queen has witnessed the Dominion of Canada emerge from the chaos of world wars, only to grow and become a fully fledged nation. Despite these bold new steps, our ties to the Crown have remained strong. And, Mr. Speaker, why would they not? If the role of the Crown is one of public service, a duty of care to God and country, this monarch has surely fulfilled all of her royal duties, not only to her home in England, but to the Commonwealth at large. And after the premature death of her father, the late King George VI, in 1952, the throne was hers. And just like that, at the tender age of 25, she was queen of 7 independent nations and the head of the Commonwealth itself. A daunting responsibility, if there ever was one, and that goes for any would-be sovereign, notwithstanding one so young. Yet, she excelled in her role. A portrait of stability, she has guided the Commonwealth through many difficult years without sullying the reputation and prestige and honor of the institution. In fact, the Crown survived the end of the British Empire, devolution, and the troubles in Northern Ireland, among many other things that could have easily derailed the Crown under weaker leadership. Through this, Elizabeth II emerged as the longest-lived British monarch, eclipsing even her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. Even more impressively, she was the second longest reigning sovereign in world history, with only Louis XIV of France serving longer than her. With that many years on the throne, her popularity only seemed to increase, drawing from a pool of public confidence. In essence, she has left the Crown glimmering, untarnished by the events that would have derailed the career of so many others. Among her responsibilities as head of state was to partake on many international tours and delegations. This role brought her to Canada 20 times, to be exact, both as the official head of state and before this as princess when she visited in 1951. A constituent in my riding, Sonia, vividly recalls listening to the Queen's coronation in 1953 on a battery-operated radio as everybody in the nation gathered to hear the news. And she was very impressed at the time with Canada's new monarch. Sonia would then later attend our Queen's second trip to Edmonton in 1959 to watch the parade on White Avenue, an event she describes as one of the highlights of her youth. And Sonia now has the unique distinction of having witnessed her third monarch, this one being Charles III. And while royal visits do not typically incite the same excitement as they may have once, royal visits and news still garner a particular amount of attention and excitement across the country, as I'm sure she would attest to. And with all of this said, I, as the Member of Parliament for Red Deer Lacombe, would like to reflect on a small moment in time. In June 28th, precisely in 1990, on this day, the Queen actually visited my riding. Although the original itinerary limited the royal couple's stay to Calgary, it was subsequently decided that the Queen would head up to Red Deer for a few hours to see the new pediatric ward at the Red Deer Regional Hospital. There was a buzz of excitement around her visit to the city, and a large crowd gathered to watch her do a walk around the new structure. The new ward was innovative, with patient-friendly elements such as facades of streetscapes in the rooms, and having the Queen visit, there was a real endorsement for this new ward. She was also introduced to a local firefighter called John Cormier, who had swum the English Channel to help raise $34,000 for the ward's construction. The firefighters as a group were key fundraisers for the ward, helping supply it with a special children's burn unit. And when the Queen was signing the official guest book, she asked a couple of times where they would like her to sign. Since no one answered her, she just signed where she thought it would be appropriate. After all, Mr. Speaker, she was the Queen. In the afternoon, she attended a lunch at the Capri Center where she presented the first Queen Elizabeth II Scholarship in Neonatology and Pediatrics to Judy Rabbis, the clinical coordinator at the pediatric unit at the time of her visit. And this is an annual scholarship that is still awarded to this day. An interesting anecdote about her visit comes from Red Deer's most revered resident historian, Michael Daw, and it involves concerns around Her Majesty's travel plans. As Her Majesty was being flown up to Red Deer from Calgary, a security measure was imposed where all air traffic in the area was temporarily suspended. Yet there was a particular provincial cabinet minister who was known for his tardiness and arrived after the security measure had come into effect. The pilot for his flight radioed in for permission to land anyway. He added for good measure that he was transporting, of course, a minister of the Crown. Much to the pilot's consternation, ground control radioed back to let him know that the incoming flight simply outranked him. It has always amazed me to see how the Queen could find the time to visit some of the little communities in between the larger urban centers, a lesson that we as parliamentarians could learn from. Furthermore, it was the Queen that specifically directed that the events she attended should primarily be public ones rather than private receptions. This trend echoed the sentiments of the last British Governor-General, the Right Honourable Harold Alexander, whose informal style at Rideau Hall had possibly impressed the royal couple on their 1951 visit to Canada. The 1990 visit marked the 5th time the royal couple had come to my home province of Alberta, and although several royals have visited Red Deer, Queen Elizabeth was the first and only to visit Red Deer as a monarch. In 2005, Her Majesty visited Edmonton's Commonwealth Stadium, and during this visit I had the chance to be in the stadium with her due to my position at the time on Lacombe Town Council. You see, Alberta had turned 100 years old in Confederation in 2005, and despite my limited interactions with her, I have a great deal of respect for Queen Elizabeth II, and I'm honored to be speaking here on her behalf today. And I know many have said in this place that Her Majesty's reign is almost half the entire existence of Canada as a country itself. Well, Alberta has only existed as a province in Confederation for 122 years, and Her Majesty oversaw 70 of those. So she has seen Alberta more than any other monarch could have possibly imagined. And she's the only queen that I, Mr. Speaker, as well as so many Canadians have ever known, and her loss will surely bring unforeseen changes to our nation. And we do, Mr. Speaker, as a nation, have the fortune of being a stable democratic country under her guidance, and a country that grew into its own under her watch. I honor the Queen today not only as a parliamentarian of a Commonwealth country, but as a proud Canadian. The future may be uncertain, but today we celebrate Queen Elizabeth II's importance to our collective past. May we remember Her Majesty's devotion to the Commonwealth and a life of public service. Godspeed the Queen. God save the King. God bless Canada.
Thank the member for his intervention. Up next is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to be here this morning because first, I want to offer my sincere condolences to the royal family on behalf of my constituents, but also to honor a life dedicated to public service. I had the opportunity to run for office, but the Queen didn't have that choice. The Queen, at age 25, became the Queen of the Commonwealth, and I find it incredible. For 70 years, this woman spent every day she dedicated herself to the people and fulfilled her duties. And as a Francophone, there are debates about whether the monarchy is important. Sometimes we see it in the media. They may say it's easy, they have a nice life in Buckingham Palace. But I think that's not what we're here to discuss today. It's really that a woman spent her whole life, 70 years, and she gave them to public service. That in and of itself is very honorable. I salute her courage. And I imagine, like us sometimes, there are moments where we don't quite feel like it on a certain day to continue doing the work. But we have the choice of retiring. We could say, today, I'll hang up my skates and finish my work. But for Queen Elizabeth II, she didn't have that choice. She had to continue fulfilling her duties every day. And once again, I find that honorable. It was mentioned a number of times by a number of MPs that the Queen came to Canada 22 times, more than any other country in the Commonwealth. And even though she didn't have the opportunity to officially visit my riding, I dare say she would have gone through it on the 417, on Highway 417. It's an important connection between Ottawa and Montreal. But I wanted to provide a few anecdotes. I didn't have the opportunity to meet the Queen, but I know my predecessor, the Honourable Don Boudria, met her for the first time when I was 1 in 1984. He met her 8 times over his career. He was the minister who accompanied Her Majesty in 2002. And if there's no official connection to her visit in my writing, we still have that connection with my predecessor, the MP for Glengarry Prescott Russell. I wanted to say, as a Francophone, I respect the fact that she spoke the language of Molière, the French language, and she used it a number of times here in Canada. That's important to me. It's important to speak both official languages, and Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, fulfilled that role knowing those 2 languages.
The last duty that she performed, and I think it was mentioned, but it speaks to the dedication of fulfilling the duty of the Queen, and I still can't believe it to this day, but the last event that she did officially was meeting with Prime Minister Truss, and that's something that, again, many of us will not have to perform duties on her last 3 days or last 48 hours of our lives, and she had to do that, and she did it honorably again, but she always did it for 70 years of the life. So again, on behalf of the residents of Glengarry Prescott Russell, I wish to offer my deepest condolences to the royal family. Thank you.
I thank the Parliamentary Secretary for his intervention. Now, the member for Calgary Centre.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
To rise in this Canadian House of Commons today to pay tribute to our departed and long-serving sovereign, Queen Elizabeth II. It is not unusual to hear the passing of someone who has reached the age of 96 years. We should all be so fortunate to have such a long life without the ailments of age that slow so many down. This Queen, one for the ages, seemed active and proved to be completely engaged right up until her last days. Indeed, she carried out one of her most important duties, asking the new British Prime Minister to form an administration to govern the United Kingdom a mere 2 days before her passing. This was a duty she had carried out 15 times. In Canada, she welcomed 12 prime ministers. In a nation where 23 people have filled that role, that is significant impact. Though her passing should not have been unexpected in anyone's heart, and her husband, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, passed away just a year and a half ago, I will say that when I heard the news, I felt a great sadness overcome me. Something had been removed from our lives that was a constant, always there, always dependable. For 70 years, more than most of our lives, she has been our queen, Canada's queen, and she has defined the role and shown the dignity, grace, and humility as an illustration of service to people in her realms and around the world, a literal personification of an institution that provides a light over which free people govern themselves. It's a challenge to separate the person from the institution. The Queen was both personal and an embodiment of good character and duty to people.
If someone asked my friends when I was a young man what I thought of the institution of the Crown, they'd be surprised to hear the point of view that I share with you today. At the time, I was someone who thought that free people should govern themselves, and that past institutions didn't have a place in our lives. Freedom, equality, and all of that. Life is a good teacher, and we were shown a very good example. The institution represented by Queen Elizabeth over 70 years is the foundation that allows this parliamentary democracy to flourish. People here will change, opinions will change, the direction of the country will change. With time, leadership, and new ideas, but the institution of the monarchy unites us. Even if everything changes around us, our tie as a people is founded on that basis.
Showed us all, the entire world, could not have been a better model of service and duty. Such is the role she played. And let's acknowledge that she played this important role every day of her life. No retiring, no holiday from this role, but a duty to bear the responsibilities associated therewith ever and always. Think of the person that Elizabeth II was, a young princess thrust by a historical accident into becoming the heir to the throne of the British Empire. The lessons taught to a young woman and the role she would be required to play in the world changed rather suddenly. Friends changed, expectations changed, and her father passed away when she was still a young woman. She was married to her one love for 74 years. She raised 4 children, and through it all, she didn't miss a step. And she always kept it real. I personally loved the vignette she filmed with Paddington Bear. Watching her pull that marmalade sandwich out of her purse brings a smile to my face. She was a reachable, real, available monarch. She never seemed as though she thought she was above anyone. We all have our personal touch points. Mine was when she visited Edmonton during the Commonwealth Games in 1978. As successful as she presented herself, the city watched Her Majesty in awe. We were so honored to host her. Peace. We all strive to have peace in this world. I think of the strife that Britain overcame in her lifetime and her role in making peace with parties that had caused her own family immeasurable suffering. But history does not move forward without forgiving the past, and she showed that resolve for peace and demonstrated respect to former adversaries that allowed peace to flourish. That is one of the ways she demonstrated greatness. The world changed much during Elizabeth II's reign. Britain, along with Europe, emerged from the devastation of World War II and rebuilt from destruction. It is still a beacon to the world. She lived in an age, and everything got to move faster during her days. She was a great queen, one that will be remembered for the ages. Her example is one that some may equal, but none will excel. She has earned her rest. Queen Elizabeth II, rest in peace, knowing that you've left this world a far better place than the one that you inherited. Long live the King.
Thank the member for that intervention. Up next, the honourable member for South Okanagan, Wes Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a real honor here to speak this morning in memory of Queen Elizabeth II and her service to Canada. And I want to begin by mentioning her last public statement just a day or two before she died, and that was a statement of condolences to the James Smith Cree Nation and the town of Weldon, Saskatchewan, communities that were impacted by unspeakable violence in recent weeks. And I want to share my condolences to those communities. We hold them in our hearts. You know, I was raised in a family of English and Scottish heritage, and while my parents and grandparents were really far from being monarchists, we did honor the Queen, and I remember every Christmas Day we would stop all revelry to listen to the Queen's message to the Commonwealth on Christmas Day, on her radio Christmas message. I only saw the Queen once, briefly, as part of a crowd in Penticton when she visited during the centennial celebrations in 1967. But a couple of weeks ago, I was going through my father was a photographer, and he had trunks of negatives and slides, and I was going through some of them literally 2 weeks ago and found a box of slides of the Queen and Prince Philip. I couldn't, in some other place, I wasn't sure, and with a bit of digging, I found out that she had visited British Columbia in 1959, when, you know, I was only 4 years old. I did not attend this event, but my father and my older brother drove up to Vernon as part of a big group of scouts and cubs that filled the park there to see the Queen and the Prince Philip, and just an indication of how important those visits were of the royal family to Canada. She made many of them. And many people that I've talked to spoke of those visits. And, you know, while my only little stronger connection to the royal family was that I actually met Prince Philip some years later. He was a noted, conservationist and bird watcher. I'm a bird biologist, and I was actually brought in to help the prince he was doing a birdathon to raise money for the World Wildlife Federation, and I guided him around parts of Vancouver a few years ago, and that was a great honor. It was quite interesting to hear his comments I was trying to show him some rare birds, and I remember him saying, I can see those from my bedroom window, because they were interesting to us, but apparently not for downtown London. But, just the fact that, Prince Philip was acting to promote conservation around the world, while being non-political, the royal family has and always had played a role in supporting causes that they thought were important, and I appreciate that. They can influence politics while remaining non-political. And I was just listening, I was interested to hear former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney's comments about the Queen and the part that she played in some, especially with regard to South Africa and the ending of apartheid. He was at a Commonwealth meeting where Prime Minister Thatcher opposed these boycotts, opposed the freeing of Nelson Mandela, but the Queen quietly supported these actions, and while being very, very tactful and diplomatic, made it clear that she thought it was important that the Commonwealth get behind the ending of apartheid and move on, and that really, really changed history. And I'll just close by mentioning, the historical role that the British monarchy has played with regards to the Indigenous people of Canada. And one of the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is to issue a royal proclamation on reconciliation. And I was also listening to the radio the other day and heard my friend and neighbor, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, Grand Chief of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and he was asked to comment on the passing of Queen Elizabeth and the ascension of King Charles. And he finished his comments by saying he was cautiously optimistic about the possible role King Charles could play in reconciliation, saying, "I think he'll surprise us." And I'll close by saying it's no surprise that the passing of the Queen has brought on such a sense of loss for so many Canadians. She served for 70 years, serving each day with a strong sense of duty, and always served with such impeccable dignity. May she rest in peace.
I want to thank the member for his intervention, and next up we have the honourable member for Lakeland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At different times, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II said, quote, "People are touched by events which have their roots far across the world." End quote. Grief is the price we pay for love. Of all the words of wisdom she shared in public addresses before and during her historic reign, those two sentiments have manifested most in the global outpouring of sorrow and affection in response to her passing. And even though she lived to an extraordinary and enviable old age, it seems to be a common experience that many of us felt caught by surprise at her death, because she was lively and worked to the end. So it was for most Canadians, I think, that Queen Elizabeth, the only monarch many of us have ever known, but who most Canadians never got to meet personally, was simultaneously distant in place and time and station, while also omnipresent in daily life and culture. There may come a day for debate about institutions and constitutions, about succession, secession, and sovereignty, about imperialism, colonialism, and republicanism, about the past and about the future. And as someone of English, Irish, and Ojibwe descent, I'm keenly aware there are many different perspectives on the monarchy and on history among Canadians and throughout the world. But today, on behalf of the people of Lakeland, I extend sincere condolences to the Queen's family and to all grieving people across the Commonwealth, particularly in the UK. I hope there's comfort and peace in the countless tributes and memories of the Queen from around the world, a remarkable display of love from people she pledged her life to serve. Recently, I remembered that as a kid at the supper table, my dad used to say I had to learn manners in case I had tea and sandwiches with Queen Elizabeth one day. It occurred to me over the past week that I took that as a very serious possibility at the time, sort of like the hazards of quicksand, which of course is ridiculous and a little embarrassing in hindsight. But then a couple of days ago, my Aunt Kelty reminded us on Facebook that we do have a tiny family connection to Queen Elizabeth. As has been mentioned many times, the Queen visited Canada more than any other country outside the UK throughout her unprecedented time as monarch. On one of those visits to Nova Scotia in 1976, my grandmother, Eileen Stubbs, or Missy Nan, as she insisted from us grandkids, was the first woman mayor of Dartmouth, and along with my Navy veteran grandfather, or Poppy, welcomed and spent some time with Her Majesty and Prince Philip, who were there to lay a wreath at the cenotaph in Halifax's Grand Parade to mark the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Aunt Kelty told me last night that our cousin Jennifer, who passed away 2 years ago and was about 4 at the time, presented the Queen with flowers. And Jennifer took that responsibility deadly seriously and put in a lot of practice to get it right. The flood of anecdotes about the Queen's grace, curiosity, humility, wit, composure under pressure, and particularly her joyful and focused attention to children, to veterans and members of the armed forces, to people with disabilities who had health struggles, and to horses and dogs, were also part of our family stories. And so I guess that's why I thought I'd better keep my elbows off the table and be ready. My grandmother loved the monarchy. Aunt Kelty posits her passion might have been mainly because the sovereign was a queen specifically, and she identified with the reality of being the only woman in a certain position. Now, I was born and raised in Alberta, but as you and I have spoken about many times, Mr. Speaker, the affinity and the relations between Atlantic Canadians and Albertans are very strong. And the values of our own family's powerful matriarch, all the way from Nova Scotia, punctuated my childhood, my developing worldview, and my interest in the possibilities of politics until she died. Duty, service, and faith were important to her, and I'm mindful of the Queen's words at the Church of England's General Synod in 2010. The Queen said, quote, "At the heart of our faith stand not a preoccupation with our own welfare and comfort, but the concepts of service and of sacrifice, as shown in the life and teachings of the one who made himself nothing, taking the very form of a servant." I think the Queen's obvious and heartfelt devotion to service and her prioritization of her duty as the crown above all else is really at the heart of the worldwide wave of grief and love in the wake of her loss. The concepts of service and of being concerned with the welfare and comfort of others are what I try to keep front of mind at all times as I aim to do my small part and earn my keep for all the people of Lakeland. Lakeland, a place that Queen Elizabeth visited in 1978. She and Prince Philip were greeted in Vegreville by thousands at Pesca Park with Ukrainian dancers in front of the largest Ukrainian Easter egg in the world outside of Ukraine, where a plaque now commemorates her visit. The then mayor of Vegreville speaks the minds of thousands of Canadians when he says, quote, "It was a day I'll never forget." The Queen received a teddy bear and signed the town guest book in Bruderheim, visited an elementary school and community landmark in St. Paul, and took the train from Vegreville to Fort Saskatchewan and met well-wishers at stops at Mundare, Lamont, and the small village of Chipman near where I grew up along the way. On visits to Atlantic Canada as an MP during the last 7 years, it struck me that traditions, history, customs, the monarchy, and specifically toasts to the Queen at regular events are much more prominent and widespread in the Atlantic region than in the relatively young province I represent. Given Canada's evolution and geography, that all makes sense, but she did visit Alberta 6 times. And so mountain ranges, a street in Edmonton, and an annual international show jumping competition at Spruce Meadows all proudly bear her name. So I'll close with her words about Alberta and Albertans, whose main qualities I think she so accurately captured in her remarks at the Centennial in 2005. She said, "When looking back on the story of Alberta, we see it extend well before 1905. It is indeed the story of Canada. Your First Nations peoples inhabited the prairies over 10,000 years ago, living in harmony with nature then as they do now. By the 1800s, these first citizens, along with the Métis people, were joined by explorers, homesteaders, and railway workers from all over the world. They had a dream: to build homes in a land where freedom reigned. They created a spirit of belonging to a bountiful country under the principles of peace, order, and good government, and the unifying influence of the Crown. It is a fitting homage to these ancestors that your motto is Fortis et Liber, strong and free." So again, on behalf of the people of Lakeland, and you know what? Also for all of those who love horses and feel kinship with the Queen's unwavering passion for this most significant animal to the course of human history and human aspiration. My husband will tell you the affliction of horse-crazy people like me is innate and enduring. In reverence for her renowned equestrianism, her successful competition horses, her preservation breeding, thank you, Godspeed, and ride on, Your Majesty. Long live the King.
I thank the member for her intervention, and I'll call on the honourable member for Edmonton Griesbach.
Mr. Speaker, through you to all Canadians, we are witnessing the turning of a page in the story that is Canada, one which Queen Elizabeth II is not only witness to, but co-author. Death is one of those journeys we must all take. Where I'm from, elders speak of returning to the stars, where we will bring what we have learned here to that next place. It is a journey of honor, remembrance, and return, one which I wish Her Majesty well on. Queen Elizabeth II was a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. And like the wise and respected elders I know, the Queen connects all of us more deeply to one another, but also to ourselves. Role models of service, devotion, and tradition. Their lives precious, for their words give us pieces of ourselves. Truly a most human experience in kinship and love. I wish her family well as they honor and mourn her passage. But she was more than a mother. She was a monarch. And in the words of the Grand Chief Roseanne Archibald, let us remember that grief and accountability can exist at the same time simultaneously. All of us here, albeit our entire country, are in a moment of reflection. As the second Elizabethan age closes, we have an opportunity of renewal. As we look back from where we have come from, it is my hope that as we turn back forward, we harness the wisdom, sacrifice, and teachings of that past and seek an even greater tomorrow. Queen Elizabeth II contributed to our shared path, much like former monarchs. Notably, on March 29, 1982, she would grant royal assent to the Canada Act, 115 years to the day when her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, gave royal assent to the British North America Act of 1867, a difficult and tumultuous time for Indigenous people. In comparison, the new act would achieve full independence for Canada by allowing us to change our constitution without approval from Britain. It enshrined the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada's constitution. And finally, Mr. Speaker, following decades of Indigenous activism and organizing by Indigenous leaders, they would push the Crown government to finally recognize existing Aboriginal and treaty rights for Métis, First Nations, and Inuit people codified in Section 35 of the new Constitution Act. But her reign was by no means a perfect one, whose mistakes will live on through the crown a weight His Majesty King Charles III must now bear. But it is also an opportunity for King Charles to write the next chapter in Canada's story, one, I hope, addresses the silence of the monarchy in the face of growing demands from around the globe for formal acknowledgement of the past injustices and the payment of reparations to the descendants of enslaved people. Additionally, here on Turtle Island, one need only look at the unimaginable legacy of Canada's horrific residential schools, created by Crown governments in your name, to see the impact of colonization here. To date, nearly 2,000 unmarked graves of children have been located. Estimates put the total number of graves to nearly 6,000. From those early kingdoms who came to Turtle Island seeking the blessings of these lands, to the great resistance wars of my forebears, Métis and First Nations on the Great Plains, to finally the commitments made in great ceremony between our nations on this land before our Creator. and from where I am from, it is known as Treaty 6. Indigenous people here have a unique and special relationship with the British Crown. It is this special relationship that is manifest in events throughout our time. Early on in a relationship that was founded by peace and trade would become one of introduction of disease, wars, and land dispossession. Followed quickly by Canada's armed expansion into the West, matched by Métis and First Nations resistance on the Great Plains. Stories remembered still today. A relationship that has seen horrific results of forced Inuit relocations, the residential schools, and the 60s scoop. But it is also a relationship of unity, forged while fighting side by side in the Great War and World War II. A relationship that is still growing, and one I hope can bring us even closer to unity while maintaining our truly nation-to-nation relationship. While the federal government is directly or jointly accountable for 76 of the 94 Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action, the Crown must play an active role in truth-telling of these lands. On behalf of Indigenous survivors, their nations, including my own, I call on the King to ensure he works closely with his Crown government in Canada to realize the TRC call to action number 45, which calls on the Government of Canada on behalf of all Canadians to jointly develop with Indigenous people a royal proclamation of reconciliation to be issued by the Crown, to build on a historic relationship, to renew our nation-to-nation relationship and ensure Indigenous sovereignty. In addition, the Crown must renounce colonial concepts used to dispossess my people, Indigenous people across Turtle Island, of their children, of their land, and in many instances, their dignity. Such concepts as the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius. This is not the work of the impossible. During his most recent trip to Canada earlier this year, the then Prince of Wales acknowledged in a speech in Yellowknife that, quote, "It has been deeply moving to have met survivors of residential schools who, with such courage, have shared their experiences. On behalf of my wife and myself, I want to acknowledge their suffering and to say how much our hearts go out to them and their families." As King, he has the opportunity to go further. It is my sincerest hope that in his first official visit to Canada as King, His Majesty Charles III will meet with Indigenous elders and leaders across this country and listen to their requests. History will judge his reign based on his response. The Crown's history here is short, and the magnitude of the time these lands have witnessed, it is a mere tree in a forest. But like lightning, the Crown's presence here has changed this land forever. When a lightning strikes, hits the perfect tree, it has the power to destroy an entire forest. But like the fires that destroy the forests of old, there is renewal and rebirth. The generations of today, like the seedlings of a great new forest, are growing. And we are a generation that can achieve this. Let us walk the next chapter, not so divided, but together, so that this forest may truly feed all of us. Kinenskam Tinawao, Mr. Speaker.
First of all, let's see if there are any other interventions. I would be remiss that on behalf of the residents of West Nova that I would not extend my own condolences and those of my constituents as well, and to reflect quickly on the 12 times that I've pledged allegiance to the Queen, that I would pledge my allegiance, of course, to the King once again. God bless the Queen. God save the King. Are there any other interventions? With none, there being no further members rising, pursuant to order made on Thursday, September 15, 2022, the House stands adjourned until Tuesday, September 20th, 2022 at 1 p.m. Sorry, at 10 a.m. I apologize. I don't want everybody.